Yeah. So thank you, Bun. So let's just get into the meditation. So sit down comfortably and we'll do some meditation together here. Okay, so just start off as always by making sure you relax properly. And one of the advantages of closing your eyes is that your body tends to come into focus quite clearly. You can feel the body, you can feel any pains or tensions or whatever you may have. So use that information to relax and just to feel, allow yourself to find that ease, first of all, of the body. And by doing that, you are already reaping some of the very basic benefits of this meditation practice. And please make sure you have the right attitude towards the meditation as you go along here. And one of the important things is just to have the sense that you're not doing very much at all, but in a sense you are just resting. You're sitting back and enjoying the peace and enjoying the possibility of just being at ease and doing nothing at all. And that sense of resting and being at ease is the opposite of doing an activity. And that is often a very positive perception. Otherwise, we can very easily do too much in the meditation practice. So just imagine yourself at ease, resting, but resting with a degree of clarity, with awareness of what is going on. And as you just sit back and relax, you can sort of feel the world flowing by, the sounds, the little things in your mind, the little thoughts, whatever it is, and just allow things to flow by. That is already a good sign that mindfulness is starting to arise, that you are aware of the flowing of the world around you. And in that flow you will also see little moments of peace, little moments of silence, and just focus on those moments and just see how they compare to the other aspects of your experience, and how delightful they are, how peaceful, and how much your mind actually longs to move in that direction. And if you get this part of the meditation right, you should be able to feel the mindfulness arising as if the world outside is gradually dropping away and the clarity of the mind comes to the forefront. And to aid this clarity of the mind, sometimes the right kind of perception, the right kind of attitude is so important. And sometimes it's very easy to get the attitude right. All you have to do is to feel perhaps a sense of gratitude for being in a community like this with like-minded good people. What a wonderful thing it is that there are such communities in this world. What a wonderful thing it is that each one of us has the opportunity to take part in this sort of gathering. coming close to the end of the meditation, and as we do so, before we come to the very end, ask yourself, how do you feel now? And if you do feel more at ease, more relaxed, more peaceful, ask yourself why that is the case. How does this process of meditation actually work? Try to understand how this happens. Okay, so that's the meditation for tonight.